good afternoon, Grace. Happy homecoming. Whenever I think of homecoming, it reminds me of my college days in the South. Like Charles mentioned, I went to school at a HBCU, historically black college university, at Clark Atlanta University, where I met my wife. And every year when we try to make it back, we'll be there in October of this year. It's always an exciting time. Homecoming is an enormous celebration. It's a time for us to reconnect with old classmates and professors, a time for us to reconnect with old friends and reminisce on the good old days. Homecoming reminds me of a family reunion, much like today. And as I was sitting there in my pew, I looked over at my daughters and I seen myself at their age sitting in those same pews. And I started to reminisce about my time here at Grace, about the good old days. And I closed my eyes and I took a trip down memory lane, and I saw myself at 5 and 6 years old in the nursery playing with toys, and I saw myself at 8 and 9 years old singing in the children's choir up here. This is when the choir pews were still over here with the drum set. I saw myself in high school at 14 and 15 in the lobby of the church with my usher uniform on, preparing to march down the aisles on Usher Sundays, the time that we always look forward to every year. And now we're at 33, 34 years old. I became overwhelmed with joy, love, and appreciation for what Grace has done for me as a member of this church. My family story with Grace starts in the 1970s with my great-grandmother, Edith Pinto, who was affectionately known as Mother Pinto by our Grace family. If you was here in the 90s or the early 2000s, it wasn't uncommon to see my great-grandmother walking through church with about 10 of her great-grandchildren in tow. I often joke with my best friend and brother, Thomas Fitch. This is Lisa Fitch and Thomas Fitch's son, that I've been coming here before I was born. Like him, my mom was pregnant with me while attending church here, so I too was born into the Grace United Methodist family. And if it's one thing my mother and my great-grandmother make sure of, that is that I was involved in some type of activity here. I was a part of the youth ushers, the children's choir. I was a part of the Christmas plays, vacation Bible school. I was at all the church camps. I was involved in some type of activity. And to me, it's something special about being raised in a church, growing up in a church, getting some of those Christian-based values at a young age. And for me, it was being a youth usher. Through the youth ushers, I learned the importance of service, of being of service to others, lending a helping hand. I learned to put others before I put myself, and to treat others as I want to be treated. Under the leadership of Mrs. Story and Mrs. Emma Lindsay, I learned respect, I learned to be humble, I learned to be polite, and I learned to be a gentleman. I could imagine when my wife met me in college, in our teenage years, she probably thought that my dad did a great job teaching me to open up doors and pull out chairs. But no, it first started with my mom at home, but it was magnified through the youth ushers. Mrs. Lindsay and Mrs. Story had one golden rule, that while we were on duty, no member of the church, but especially the women, should have to open the door for themselves. Much like the theme of our homecoming celebration, expect great things, they expected us to be great. And we definitely delivered. While preparing for today's homecoming celebration, I wanted to give you guys a Bible verse that related to expecting great things. And I'm not like Pastor Gillespie or Pastor Hill, where I have a Rolodex of Bible verses in my head I can just pull from at any given time. So I did what most people do for my generation. I went to Google. And I said, Google, give me a Bible verse related to expecting greatness. And the first Bible verse that came up was Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And whenever I come across a Bible verse from Philippians 4, it always reminds me of our theme scripture. Something that's so important to me. It was actually the second Bible passage that I learned and memorized. The first one was John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. I learned that at 6 years old in Miss Studemeier's class. I think it was the requirement for us to memorize that in order for us to graduate and go on to the next level of Sunday school. But my great-grandmother was bent on having my cousins and I all memorize the theme scripture. because she knew we'll be called up here to deliver it. And I think she didn't want us to embarrass her. So when we didn't have to go to school, when we had free days, we called them free days. When we had free days from school, instead of us going outside to play or waking up and watching cartoons, we had to go to my great-grandmother's room, and one by one she'll have us read the theme scripture. And at 8 years old, I didn't really know what it meant. But I knew that if I wanted to watch TV or go outside, I needed to memorize the theme scripture. And honestly, it wasn't probably until I went to college. It was my senior year. One of my good friends, he was scheduled to graduate, and they told him that he was one class short. And he invited his entire family out from Bakersfield, California to Atlanta, Georgia to see him graduate. And while they were enjoying the city, celebrating, preparing to go to graduation, he was in the president's office speaking to the administration, begging and pleading for them to let him graduate, and he'll promise to make it this one class. And after rejection after rejection, after hearing no, after no, after no, after no, he called me, and I think he was looking for some advice or for me to console him. I honestly didn't know what to say. But the only thing that came to mind was Philippians 4, verses 6 and 7. This was before 19 was added. And I told him, I said, bro, you have to pray. And when we hung up the phone, I took my own advice and I got on my knees and I prayed. This is the true story. I got on my knees and I prayed, and I asked God just to work it out for me. And no kidding you, no more than 20 minutes went past, and he called me back and told me that the administration said that if he promised to take that class next semester, he could graduate and walk the stage with us. And that reminded me that sometimes we don't know what God is doing or how he's doing it, but we know who God is. Yes. And we know that he'll never leave us nor forsake us. The theme scripture through grace taught me the power of prayer, the importance of prayer. Sometimes just going to God in prayer. Sometimes just talking to him in conversation, not leaning on our own understanding. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything through prayer. At the beginning of my life is Grace United Methodist Church. At my foundation is grace. At the foundation of my life, grace was there. When I think of a foundation, I think of a house. And when building a house, they'll tell you the single most important component is to make sure you start with a solid and strong foundation. For when life happens and Mother Nature has her way, a tornado might come and hit your house, your roof might suffer some damage, hurricane might come, your windows might be blown out. Living in California, we'll all experience an earthquake or two, or 10 earthquakes. But after that earthquake hits, and you might notice the cracks in the walls, or your furniture is all shifted, your house is just in array. If your foundation is still strong and intact, the one thing you won't have to do is start over from scratch and rebuild a new house. You won't have to tear down the damaged house and rebuild. And I look at that like my life. That no matter what life thrown at me, I might have cried. Life might have left me hurting, beaten, and bruised. Pastor spoke earlier that life had me bending over and not standing up. Life had me bending over and leaning on many occasions, but the one thing it couldn't break me, because my life was built on a foundation built by God through Grace United Methodist Church. Now that I have 2 daughters, 2 children of my own, I often think about the passage, the old African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. And I'm so grateful that Grace, you guys were my village growing up. Because I just wasn't treated like the little bad kid at church. Some people would come up here and give a whole sermon about the headaches I gave growing up. But I wasn't only treated like the bad kid at church. I was treated like a son, like a grandchild. I was treated like a little brother, like a nephew. You guys treated me like family. And it made all the difference. It made all the difference of who I am today. So Grace, as we celebrate 51 years, as we celebrate our homecoming, as we reconnect with each other and we reminisce on the good old days here at Grace, I also want us to think about the future, about the love and support that was poured into me and the love and support that needs to be poured into the next generation of Grace members. Grace. Happy 51 years. Happy homecoming to you. And again, thank you for being my village.